for a ringer. That's my position, unless we don't have a critical instrument for the performance. But we've got a tremendous music program here. We've got a lot of students that are very passionate about the music. The pit orchestra is rather large, and I see 5 people on there. I don't know why those 5 people were chosen. Why are we paying $500 per performance for supplemental instruments?
My suggestion to the board is to give me guidance about whether you want us to use our time to pursue that and do a presentation, and you can decide.
I don't want a presentation. I'm just assuming that because it's on here.
You're asking for a review of part of the music program.
I'm asking that when somebody is submitting a personnel for a recommendation that the board
Right,
approve a
but you're making a
hire.
policy statement. You're saying you do not believe that we should be paying anyone to play if we have students who play those instruments. That's a decision for the board to
That may be
make.
considered a board policy, but I would think that as educators and people who care about our musical performance and our things, that shouldn't be a policy. That should be common sense. We don't pay ringers to come in and join our lacrosse team because we want a better performance of our lacrosse team. We can't do that. So
I
I believe it's a
understand
common practice throughout.
I know it's a common practice. My point is, if we need the instrument, that's great. I don't know who they are. I mean, for all I know, they could be,
Mary's involved in the play, maybe she can shed some light.
Hi, sorry. I'm the stage manager of the play, for those of you who don't know. I can say, I can't speak for every single one of these 5 people, but I do know that a majority of them play instruments that are not played by students, whether it be that the students don't have the time, maybe they do play in band, but not in the pit orchestra. So I can say that they don't have
that's what I
those
was looking for. Thank you, Mary.
students.
That was some good insight.
Yes.
That prevented
We
a
have a
lot of
student
work.
rep on the board.
I owe you one.
Mayor.
After the meeting, though.
That's it for me.
Anybody else? Motion to approve personnel. Mike, second Rob, all in favor? Janice, any communications?
No.
Anyone else? Give me a look, Sean. Discussion. The first is the Tri-States Consortium.
Okay, thanks, Mr. Zukowski. A couple of weeks ago, I presented some ideas that the administration and has been discussing to move our program forward with an eye towards a series of presentations to find out whether the board wants us to move forward with these proposals. Would you, in short, do you think these ideas for improving the program are worthy? In which case we'll spend the time that we have to develop them, or do you think that it would not be a good use of our time to pursue them? So tonight, Mr. Holzman is here to talk about something called the Tri-States Consortium, and also to introduce the idea that maybe we want to change the time that the kids begin school.
Thank you, Dr. Cohen. Good evening, board members and ex officio. The purpose of my presentation this evening is to talk a little bit about some ideas that I had in discussion with Dr. Cohen and Mr. Meinster about what we can do both district-wide and particularly at the high school moving forward. As of now, we always look to create opportunities for students to apply and transfer knowledge. One of the reasons why we're looking at things like AP Capstone, science research. These are growth-oriented initiatives that we want to ultimately offer to our students to facilitate student growth, student thinking, critical thinking, all the building blocks of what they're going to need for post-high school life, whether it's college or it's in the workforce. One of the things I was connected with was a former administrator here in the district. He was an administrator here for about 16 years. His name was Marty Brooks. He now facilitates and runs the Tri-State Consortium. And essentially this is made up of schools throughout the tri-state with a common goal. And the common goal revolves around authentic assessment, it It revolves around professional development. It revolves around collaboration. So all the basic tenets of what we look at as what would make for a high-performing, well-rounded school district, well-rounded and high-performing students. So one of the things that they provide are trainings, professional development, coaching, things of that nature, and it's a way for us to continue to build on what we currently have and continue to move our educational process and our educational institution forward. So one of the things that they focus their attention on, and something that I've been very vigilant in focusing attention on as well, has been professional development. We have teachers doing flipped classroom this year. We had a professional development session on authentic assessment. I plan on continuing that work this year in the professional development sessions after school, and we constantly have conversations with our teachers in both in pre and post-observation conferences on effective and engaging questioning, because if you ask a better question, you get a better answer. So the more critical thinking you require of your students, the more they're going to provide for you. So AP Capstone, go ahead, Rich.
Can you explain to me a little bit more detail what authentic assessment means?
Authentic assessment would mean that taking an activity that can be applied to something outside of the scope of school. So as an example, I was in Mr. Driscoll's class today, and it was the picture of differentiated instruction. You had 6 different groups working at 6 different points in the curriculum. Some had taken prep courses prior to, like drawing and design for production, so they were working on other things. Basically, you had students that were converting measurements, converting from different measuring scales, and you had other students on the more advanced side that were making scales of designing floor models for a home. You had another group working on redesigning the technology room at the middle school. So they're taking the skills of architecture. So you teach them how to use a T-square, and you teach them how to use the measurements. So now the question is, so the now what? The now what is, well, we're looking to perhaps redesign the technology room in the high school, at the middle school. Give the students at the middle school the task of taking their applied knowledge, looking at the scale of what the room looks like, and finding more efficient ways of designing that room. So that's an example.
That's really good. That's a horrible name for that.
What?
Authentic assessment.
I will be honest with you, it's a buzzword
No,
like
I know
anything
it's
else.
not our word.
But yes, but
the way
it's-
you described it provides a tremendous amount of value and worthwhile.
Sure.
But authentic
Absolutely.
assessment.
The practice of it, and the reality is that you want teachers to use it as a tool essentially as a learning tool. It's not something that they would use at the end of every unit, the end of every chapter. It's something that gets incorporated in to give students an idea of what this really means in the bigger picture. Not so much about what New York State or Common Core says it should, but what it really means about how you can apply it someplace else.
And how do we? I'm good. Thank you.
Sure. So Alan, Mr. Meinster went over the AP Capstone. We were accepted. We're one of 6 schools on the island, 5 of which actually were just accepted this year, 4 next year. The information that was on that YouTube clip, Mr. Meinster already went over, so I won't duplicate information. The high school rollout of providing information incorporates a parent letter that is currently on the website and was sent home. We're having a parent meeting on the 18th. The PTSA has generously allowed me to have time with the parents on the 18th to describe and encourage parents to have their student enroll in the course. I plan on doing grade level presentations on Monday and Tuesday to our current sophomores and juniors respectively during home base to let them know what the course entails. And again, encouraging them to give it some thought. And that'll take place prior to the parent meeting so that both student and parent can have a conversation about it. In the process, in the interim, we'll be reviewing course materials and conducting research committee work, which basically will entail looking at research projects that have taken place and are taking place between grade levels 6 through 12 and coming to some sort of alignment and agreement as to what student should be doing at each specific grade level. We have a visitation scheduled. One of my colleagues from Suffolk County is now in Nassau County. He's the principal of Hewlett-Woodmere High School, and he has organized a visitation for 5 of us to go to the high school for most of the day to observe 2 seminar classes and a research class, and there'll be 2 opportunities throughout the day to have a Q&A session, both with teachers and the principal himself. So we're very excited about that. Like I said, we'll be reviewing syllabi and textbook materials. The capstone team currently is made up of Mr. Arini, Dr. Chowski, Ms. Hanson, myself, Mr. Meinster, and Dr. Meyer. And again, as I mentioned earlier, we're looking to look at 6 to 12 research alignment. So the Tri-State Consortium, as I mentioned earlier, is an organization of administrators, teachers, and school districts from around the tri-state, and working together. I have in quotes as being critical friends. Essentially, we go to each other's schools, we work with each other, we talk about and collaborate on the ways in which instructional practices should be delivered, the ways in which students should be assessed, and we share and we develop with each other for a common purpose, and that's really the beauty behind the consortium. And the consortium for us, they have an affiliation with Middle States. And Middle States accreditation is something that this high school actually had a long time ago, and through transiency of administration, we've lost that accreditation. I personally have sat on 2 accreditation committees, accrediting Syosset and Schreiber High School in Port Washington, and it's a lengthy process. It's probably about a year or 2 in the works for a school to be accredited. The school has to be evaluated on 12 different criteria: philosophy and mission, governance, facilities, school improvement, health and safety, school climate, educational programs, assessment, student services, student activities, and informational resources. And the people on the committee sit with people in the school, teachers, students, administrators, grounds, security, secretarial, and go through each of these components to determine whether or not they're meeting that standard. And if they're meeting that standard, you are awarded accreditation. And that accreditation essentially means that you are working at a standard that is above anything that would be normally expected of a school district. It goes beyond the scope of what New York State requires, and it's a nice feather in the district's cap, particularly us who once held this standard, and this accreditation, I should say, and Marty Brooks, who was once an administrator here, who now runs the Tri-State Consortium, would love to see us, and as would I, would love to see us be a part of this consortium.
Excuse me, Dan, I
Yes,
think
sir.
that process is a little more than a week, as I recall, for that accreditation to take place.
It's a year or 2 in the
No, but I
making.
meant the visitation
It's 3
by
days.
the-
It's 3 days. Yep, it's 3 days. Well, actually, it's 3.5 days. On the first day, they do a visitation of the school itself, and then days 2 and 3, they meet with all the groups, conduct all their interviews, write up all their reports, and on that 4th day, that morning, is when the chairperson of the committee reads the report to determine whether or not the school will receive accreditation. So the accreditation, Middle States accreditation, was designed for the purposes of for accountability purposes, self-appraisal, and it's a rigorous application. It's something that really holds schools to a high standard. And it's an objective, external validation of school quality, school achievement. And the key to it is it's not just a snapshot in time. It's about continuous improvement. It's about continually working toward goals that you have set and the things that you have outlined and fulfilling those obligations, because the accreditation committee comes and reviews you again a few years later to see where you are, to see if this was just in fact smoke and mirrors, or this is something that you really truly believe in and are doing the work that's necessary to maintain that accreditation. So the goals are to provide a reliable assurance of educational quality, develop a healthy, forward-looking, adaptive organization, and broaden public understanding about what the importance is of this accreditation. It's not just a blue ribbon in our display case. It means much more than that. It's something that you put your heart and soul into in ensuring that not only do you meet the standard, but that you maintain it as well. So the Tri-State Consortium is in line with our district missions and philosophy. We look to improve ourselves at every turn. We look to improve our instructional strategies. We look to improve our assessments, school climate, school offerings, program offerings. These are the things that we already do. So it's really now a matter of sort of organizing it into a neat little package that it gets evaluated by the Middle States. And this would broaden our resources. I mean, that's huge. We always look, one of the things that I know that we always talk about is, don't we have people in-house that can do this? Don't we have our own resources that can do this for us? We join a consortium like this, yes, we do. That's considered in-house. Those are people we can reach out to. Those are going to be our go-to people. Those are going to be people that can provide turnkey training for us. We can in turn do the same for them. It works hand in hand. We don't operate in isolation anymore, and I think that's something that stymies any school from growing, is not working with another district or other administrators or other teachers.
Is there a list, Dan, of the schools that belong?
I can get you that list. Yes, absolutely.
Does that impact our students applying for colleges, and if the college realizes that?
That's a middle state accreditation? Yeah,
I would think so,
absolutely.
yeah.
Absolutely, because they'll look at our school profile and they'll see that we are middle states accredited, and that goes a long way. That means something. It really does. It means something. The consortium conducts 2 conferences annually. I just attended one with Dr. Anthony and Mr. Meinster. And the consortium, the study groups, meet 4 to 5 times a year on issues, anything relating to leadership, and student learning is always the focus. So that's something that there is a cost factor. There is a cost factor to it, but I think the cost factor is worth the consideration of what we can get from this. Okay, so that's a tri-state. The next step to my vision is a start time proposal. This is just something I want to throw out there to the board for purposes of garnering some sort of guidance as to whether or not it is something we should pursue and look into and report back, or it's something that perhaps the board is not wanting of us to use our time and energies towards. Through actually the very resourcefulness nature of my astute guidance counselor, Mr. Arini, he located Dr. Lauren Hale, who's a researcher at Stony Brook University. Her area of expertise is in sleep patterns in adolescents. So as of late, this seems to be a hot topic item. It's been in the On Board magazines. The University of Minnesota put out a study last year. The Center for Disease Control just recently put out a report about school start times and the amount of sleep that adolescents need. Now the thinking is, and just so I can quell it right now, it's not about telling them to go to sleep earlier. It's not about saying just go to sleep at 10 o'clock. It's not about that, and that's something that Dr. Hale, who I'm going to invite up now, is going to talk about. Adolescents aren't wired that way. So it's important to perhaps consider changing our start times. I know there's a concern about Section 11 in sports. We've spoken to Section 11. All we would need to do in that regard is request later start times on our games. If in the event we had a game, let's say out in East Hampton, we'd have to let the kids go a little earlier, which is what we do anyway. So nothing would really change. So nothing would really be impacted in that regard. The logistical piece is that's something that we would need to work on, assuming that was something you wanted us to. So I would like to introduce
Before
Dr.
Dr.
Hale.
Hale comes up.
Go ahead.
I think one of the reasons that we have this issue, number one, I think we've got a lot of ambitious students, but I think homework and study time is a big reason why I think the kids are up late. They have school in the morning, they have after-school activities, they are
busy.
involved in sports,
Yep,
music,
they're
et
very
cetera.
busy.
There is a tremendous amount of
Yep,
homework
yep.
that is putting undue stress on that. Are we going to perhaps look at the level of homework and the expected amount of homework? And
That
study
is
time
a
that should be, because that's a big, it's not just sleep.
Yeah,
It's why are they going to
there is a big issue that is associated with that. One being that our students do tend to be very busy. They're involved in sports, they have jobs, they have other obligations even at home that might not include co-curricular activities that perhaps get in the way of doing homework at a reasonable hour. They're taking multiple college-level classes that require that level of commitment and time commitment.
There are studies out there that say that homework isn't as effective as people
That
think
is
it
true. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, philosophically, we could talk about the amount of homework I gave when I was a teacher versus the amount of homework the teachers give now. It's an individual philosophy. Unfortunately, we don't have one that sort of falls under the umbrella of what we believe homework should or should not be. Do I believe that students should go and do 50 math problems and 49 of them are all the same, just different numbers? No, I don't believe that at all. But if it's something that's meaningful, it's something that is challenging, and it's something sometimes the things that are challenging and meaningful take time. Sometimes it can't be done in 15 minutes. Sometimes it does take an hour. But if you're taking 3 classes that require that, yeah, there's a balance, there's an imbalance there, I get that.
Okay.
Will the flipped classroom play into that then?
The flipped classroom does play into that a little bit because they're taking care of technically the instructional part at home. So that could still be though, let's call it a half hour, 40 minutes of listening to a lecture, taking down notes, preparing for the next day's activity. It might not necessarily be a time saver, but it would perhaps be a different level of engagement at home that might not be such a struggle to stay awake for. So there are a whole host of factors. But I'm gonna turn it over to Dr. Hale. If you push down, change the slide. She's gonna go over her research with you, and it'll be a topic for further discussion, I'm sure. Dr. Hale.
To lower this and be grateful that it's here because I happen to have no voice right now. But thank you for inviting me or including me on the agenda tonight. As Mr. Holtzman said, I'm a professor of preventive medicine at Stony Brook. I'm also on the board of directors for the National Sleep Foundation, and I'm the editor-in-chief of their academic journal, The Sleep Health. And I'm going to share some slides that I adapted from slides that Dr. Judy Owens, who's at Harvard, sent me. Excuse me. And she, importantly, is the lead author on the American Academy of Pediatrics' recent statement in 2014 recommending that all high school students, middle and high school, start at 8:30 or later. So I believe you guys are 7:20 start time.
You sound like you need to get some rest.
I do. I also have 2 young kids, but this is not how I usually sound. But I made it here. Thank you. It's pretty embarrassing. So, I have to push down. So what's happening to teenagers? As you know, as teenagers go through puberty and as they get older, there are a lot of physiological changes, including to their circadian rhythm. The biggest change is this phase delay. Teenagers have a harder time initiating sleep, and it's easier for them to fight sleep. So that goes into the comment earlier about these other environmental factors that are causing this phase delay, competing priorities for sleep, such as excessive homework, which is something I asked Mr. Holtzman about when I met with him a month or so ago, after-school activities, after-school employment, and importantly, there's a huge amount of research now on the impacts of screen time on sleep and well-being. And the screen time issue is pervasive. We have to be realistic that this is getting in the way of kids going to sleep at a reasonable time. But even beside all the environmental factors, there are these major physiological factors going on. What also is going on, thanks to early school start times, is kids are needing to wake up early, and what happens at the end of the night or in the morning is it's curtailing their REM sleep, which is an important phase of sleep when teenagers and adults are consolidating their memories and putting to they're learning putting to their mind what they learned in the previous day. So these early wake times is selectively cut into learning among teenagers. And then there's this discrepancy because if you're not getting enough sleep all week, you sleep in on the weekends and you stay up late on the weekend, and that leads to an extra social jet lag on Monday morning, which has been linked to poor academic performance, depressed mood, and EDS, which refers to excessive daytime sleepiness. As Mr. Holtzman already noted, the average high school student needs between 8.5 and 9.5 hours of sleep, and the average school student gets around 7.25 hours per night. And that is a clinically significant difference. You see differences in performance and achievement with less than 8 hours. So on a practical level, this means teenagers should be falling asleep before 11 p.m. I'm doing a study of 1,000 teens from around the country right now. Fewer than 60% of teenagers, or is that right? 60% of teenagers are going to bed later than 11 p.m. So this is just not happening. I don't know what it's like in this district, but probably most of your teens are going to sleep later than 11 p.m. because of their physiological changes. And if they go to sleep at 11, that means they need 9 hours. They should be waking up at 8. they're already in school here at 8 a.m. Nationally, around 80% of teens are getting less than 9 hours of sleep per night. So why do we need healthy sleep? You probably know this. I certainly need my own healthy sleep. Very well-controlled studies on sleep restriction shows effects on the prefrontal cortex and executive functioning, which leads to things that we all want our teenagers to be doing well, being flexible, planning, problem-solving, decision-making, good judgment. There are big impacts on emotionality. Sleep loss results in heightened emotional response as well as less control over one's emotions. We also see increases in sleep loss is associated with increases in depression and suicidal thoughts. And then there's a physical health impact of short sleep. Experiments show that teens who are deprived sleep make worse, less healthy food choices and eat more calories, and this explains the population-based studies where people who are sleeping fewer hours per night gain more weight than those who do not, who sleep a sufficient amount. As I mentioned, Dr. Owens led the charge at the American Academy of Pediatrics, and the recommendation is that all middle schools and high schools start at 8:30 a.m. or later. And what is the evidence for this? We know that decreased sleep duration is associated with lower academic achievement, and earlier start times have the following adverse outcomes: shorter sleep duration, erratic sleep patterns, increased sleepiness, in terms of academic outcomes, increased tardiness, more stimulant use, and higher daytime sleepiness. And when you look at the studies in many schools around the country are shifting to delayed start times, you see impacts on sleep, which may not be an outcome that you're interested in, but I sure am. And I think what's important is a lot of people say, oh, if school starts later, they're just going to go to bed later. But that's not what the science shows. If school starts later, they fall asleep at the same time because that's what their body is telling them to do. And then they wake up later, which means they get longer sleep duration and more of that important REM sleep. So they're getting more morning sleep and greater amounts. The later the school start time, they get more sleep. And they report less falling asleep in class, which I'm sure none of the teachers here appreciate. In terms of school performance, you see better attendance, reduced dropout rates, improved test scores, improved grades, and also this affects both the disadvantaged students as well as the highest achieving students. So it affects not necessarily equally, but it's not just a selective improvement. And finally, as a public health professor, I want to point out the impacts extend well beyond just academic performance to improve mood of the teenagers. Fewer report feeling unhappy or depressed. There are fewer health center visits. And in terms of public safety, 3 studies have shown a significant reduction in crash rates due to drowsy driving. It happens this is also Drowsy Driving Awareness Week. So the initiative to delay school start times is very timely. And I was invited by Mr. Holtzman just as a resource, and I'm thrilled to be able to answer any questions and talk to you more about it. Thanks.
Thank you.
Do you know how many local school districts have a delayed start time or later start time?
There are some, there aren't a lot, there are some, most recently, Jericho, starts at 9 o'clock. And there are some schools that have plus or minus 30 minutes from us. But there are still some that, 7:20, 7:30. But I can get you, if you want, I can do some homework on the schools that have a start time later than 7:20.
Nope. We're going to find out whether the
Okay,
board wants
fair.
us to spend
Okay,
time
fair.
doing this research.
This last point I want to make in closing. First, thank you for staying with me. I know it's late. So the purpose of the vision, ultimately the hope for the vision is that we increase excitement and passion for learning, the programs that we're looking at, and the implementation of positive changes that will not only benefit administrators and teachers, but also our students as well. create a collaborative community of learners. We need to lead by example, and I think something like the Tri-State Consortium certainly does that. Focus on providing students with educational opportunities and using growth orientation in a world that's changing. We need to have a mind that is focused on growth and not on being fixated or fixed on this is what it is and we can't do anything about it. Yes, there are certain things that are like that, but I think when it comes to schools and it comes to learning, I think we always need to grow. I think we as a district and a community have an obligation to continually look for paths for growth for both ourselves and for our students. So that was the purpose of my presentation tonight, and I appreciate your attention. Thank you.
Thank you.
While you're still up there,
Sure.
as the principal of the high school, and you know your limited resources, you know how stretched you and guidance and everyone else are, is the sleep study or the flip time in the sleep worth your dedicated resources? Because we're making this determination in a vacuum.
Sure.
We don't want to tell you to pursue it and dedicate what limited time and resources you have if you don't think it's worth it. Is it worth it?
It's completely worth it. To be honest with you, John, I wouldn't have met with Dr. Hale the times that we did. I wouldn't have spent the time even incorporating it into the presentation and addressing it if I didn't. It's something that the things that I've presented tonight, I am very passionate about. I think the school's in a good place right now from a managerial standpoint, where the time that I would have normally have perhaps spent 5 years ago dealing with things, I can actually allocate time now to doing things that are beneficial for us as a school and for us as a district. And yeah, I'll make the time.
And I guess this question for you and Dr. Hale maybe, in the districts that do this, do they typically start their younger children earlier then? And is there any detrimental effect to that?
I actually can't speak to the logistics of how other places are doing it, but I believe they move they swap it, so rather than having, it varies, but elementary schools are then moved earlier because elementary school students are waking up earlier anyway. If anybody has young children like I do, up at 5 a.m., awesome. Whereas the high school students are the ones who need and want to sleep in, so they move later. But it is a busing challenge. There's always a busing.
Thank you.
Thanks, Dan.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So we have two ideas to pursue, participating in Tri-States Consortium and doing research to do a presentation on what it would mean to change K-12 start times.
Well, I think along that line, I'd be curious to know what it does to the transportation cost. Do you need additional buses now to meet that change in time, per se?
Or do you just flip
Do you
them?
just flip the delivery time for each of the different grades?
So my question is, if we presented answers to all of your questions, would you pursue this? Assume that we can answer all of your questions. Is it a good thing?
Yeah.
I would say yes.
Well, if it's beneficial, if the data shows that it's beneficial to the students, I would say it's a good thing.
Yeah, I agree with you. If it does show that it's beneficial, why not do it?
I think we should ask our student representative whether she
Yeah.
thinks having an extra hour of sleep in the morning is a good thing.
I had a feeling.
Not to put you on the spot, but if you say no, I'm going to be very surprised.
Well, it was briefly talked about last week, or not last week, 2 weeks ago, I guess. So casually, I've slipped it into some conversations between my peers. They have no clue what I was doing, but I've gotten an overall yes. I know myself personally, like I can't fall asleep up before a certain time. I've tried, it doesn't work. So I found a lot of relation between myself and what Dr. Hal said. So I think it would be a good idea.
Something I've been
So we'll work it
advocating
up.
for about 20 years.
What about Tri-States?
I think it's worth doing.
Absolutely.
We had it before.
Two very good things. Good.
We had discussion maybe 6-7 months ago about Blue Ribbon as well. How does Blue Ribbon,
I think Blue Ribbon is a different thing.
The Blue Ribbon's at the federal level, correct?
Yeah, that's a whole other thing, but I think if we start with middle states, we go work our way up to that, sure.
So we have board consensus for tri-state?
For both,
For both.
yes.
Much prefer these conversations than placements of fences.
Indeed.
That's it. Any additional comments from residents?
Oh,
She's
she gonna
back.
make up for lost time?
She's saving up weeks' worth.
I got better after I started writing things down feverishly. First of all, I just want to point out that I was excited to see this last speaker because I read a book like 3 years ago that showed, and I was looking at the research where it correlated SAT scores and other things to the later cert time in the schools in the Midwest, and how after they had it in for 2 or 3 years, how you saw this bump in the overall academics of the school. So I would be a strong advocate of us pursuing this and looking into it further. One of the things I want to point back when we were talking about all the things that Mr. Zukowski doesn't want to talk about,
I didn't want to talk about it.
when we talk about the studies, and I actually have copies of those studies, when you look back at them, many of them the projections were wrong, and grossly wrong, not just a little bit wrong. Now, I'm not going to say that this one isn't going to be that way, but I think we do need to take that into account, that when we look at the history, Shoreham-Wading is a very unique populace, and we have to take all these things with a grain of salt. We have to submit them, we have to submit them. But I'm wondering is that if they're wrong, does SCD change its mind if it decided to take money from us? So if in 6 years we do get a larger population increase because we are so desirable here, would that change?
You mean if the board went ahead and built
Kept the current
classrooms
plans.
that were not supported by SED, if we
Yes.
paid the full freight,
Yes.
would they give us money if we had more kids in 6 years?
If
That's a
they
really
don't.
interesting
You
question.
know, we
I
lobbied for
doubt it.
about 15 years and ended up almost suing before we got prior year state aid. I think
get it.
I think you have an idea where it's gonna
I'm
go.
just curious
My
whether or
gut
not
is
there was
no.
a contingency plan. You know, our commitment, you know, when we talk about being a magnet to other parents, I mean, she talked